John Gosden has been a towering figure in horse racing for decades. Often described as one of the sport's best communicators with sage advice and observations on all aspects equine. But for most racing fans, it is his skill in preparing some of the finest horses of recent times for stardom that he will be remembered for, and that list is lengthy and distinguished, much like the great trainer himself. John Gosden, 6 times British champion trainer, 3,000 winners around the world, more than 100 Group or Grade 1 wins. But starting off in the sport, I think your father advised against you getting involved in training, is that right?
Yeah, it was about a week before he died. He told me the last thing I should do is be a racehorse trainer. Yeah. Fortunately, I was only 16. I had time to forget that advice.
And tell me a little bit about how you therefore decided that this was going to be the path you wanted to take. Because if I remember correctly reading about you, you ended up in Venezuela as an architect or working as an architect?
No, well, as I said, father was very ill. He got called from this house, actually, by David Robinson to ask if he'd come and oversee his horses. My father said, look, I'm very ill, I'm having to pack in. He had Shalaa in the stable as a 2-year-old. That's how ill he was. He couldn't stay on the tree. And he said, but I got a very good young man, Michael Jarvis. And that's how Michael came up here. But no, you were brought up with horses all around you. I mean, I used to ride as a kid, a lovely old horse called Tintinambula, who won a Manchester Cup twice. So, I got ruled off pretty quickly, age 12, too heavy and not always wanted trying to win a little gallop, But fundamentally, you go on away, but it's still in your blood. So then I went obviously up to university, to Cambridge, and I used to spend a fair bit of time coming over here on a motorbike, and then in a Morris Oxford to see the racing. And really from that point of view, 1974 was a terrible time. I finished at university. I'd met Rachel, but she had 2 years to go, and they wanted rid of me.
That was a good time, though.
Yeah. And so you couldn't get a job. It was 3-day work week, 3 days a week. I hope we're not heading the same situation now. The country was in a real mess. We were borrowing money from the IMF, and I got a job offer in Venezuela, and Venezuela was lending money to the IMF, and look where Venezuela is now. But to help build a science park. And so I got my degree, and off I went and worked in Caracas. But I found myself going very early out to the track, El Hipodromo La Rinconada, and helping a guy called Milad Ziadi, who was a clever old trainer, with his horses in the morning. Then I come home, shower, change, go to the office. Then you get a siesta in the afternoon, back to the office, sleep, then out to the track again. So it was something it's in your blood. So I got a bit honest with myself, and I wrote to Noel Murless and asked if he needed an assistant. It's the last thing he did need, poor man. He had William Hastings Bass, but he very kindly said he'd think about it. I got my foot in the door. I said, I'll do anything. So I said, I'll do the lofts. I'll be a loft man. So I started off as loft man.
Wow. You're in the very unique position of being one person who can boast about having experienced working with Sir Noel Murless and Vincent O'Brien, 2 of the greatest trainers of all time.
Yeah, they were both they were quite shy men, and they didn't appreciate all public. They wouldn't really like the world now of multimedia. That would be, I'm sure Vincent would use it very effectively, but they found that it would be an invasion of their privacy. They wouldn't like it. Extraordinary trainers, intuitive, beyond intuitive, and fully able to read, understand the horses around them, what was required. And Noel was probably more training homebreds, whereas Vincent would do that, but also he would go to the sales and have probably the greatest eye for a yearling there ever has been. And to that extent, they were masters to learn from. But the problem with learning from a master, they make it look easy, and it isn't.
Steve and I were talking about it in preparation for chatting to you about what you may have learned from them that's still applicable in the modern era.
Very much so, because, it's not complicated. It's the horse. It comes down to the horse. You've got to have the right horses. You've got to be able to, be in a position where luckily you stumble over one, which happens when you're young, get that horse that helps you break through and get recognized as being able to train a decent horse. But it is all about the horse, and it's about the owner or the breeder of those horses. Without them, you're going nowhere as a trainer. once you realize that and accept it, and just banging a gong and making a noise isn't going to do the trick. And from there you can build. And if that horse that you've initially training is best chances to win the Cellar at Brighton, so be it. You've done your job. And all you can do is hope that coming along somewhere is going to be the real thing, the one that catches the imagination. And then suddenly, if that happens, you'll go from having about 3 or 6 horses to up in number.
Well, this series is about the horses that have made the individuals racing greats. And you have been lucky enough to be involved in the sport across the world. So the first port of call for where you achieved great success is Santa Anita, California, Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And perhaps you can take us to your journey in being there, of all places.
Well, look, I had, between school and university, I'd gone out to America and done some hot walking, which is, it's this nice job. You get paid $100 a week and you walk the horse around after it's worked. So I was always interested in American racing, and I saw it. I was based in on the East Coast with Eugene Jacobs, who is Hersh Jacobs' brother. And Hersh Jacobs is a legendary trainer. And I went then back in my first university holidays, summer holidays, back to the track. So going to America, watching it, learning about it. And it was fantastic racing and a great experience. So it was never exactly alien to me. But as we were chatting about before we sat down, Noel Murless trained a horse called J.O. Tobin. And of course, he was the most brilliant 2-year-old, only Blush and Groom could beat him. And he then went to America because Sir Noel wasn't well, couldn't train on, which was probably a great tragedy, rather like my father with Charlottetown. And I went out there and delivered the horse. And the owner said, well, would you stay? And I said, look, I can't stay. I don't have any work papers. If you get me a green card, I'll come back. So I then went back. I got a message that, luckily for me, Vincent O'Brien was looking for an assistant. So I then went there for that year. So that's 76 into 77. And then at the end of that year, my green card came through, and Rachel was a barrister in London at that time, and we both decided, look, you're not going to let you train horses in Hyde Park. There's no way I could be in London and be a trainer. You've got to be here, either in Ireland or Newmarket or Yorkshire or Wiltshire. You can't do you can't live in London as well. So we decided we'd both go there. So we went there together. She qualified as a California lawyer, and she paid the rent and put the food on the table, because I certainly wasn't earning anything. But I went round with the vets and did a bit of hot walking again, and then I started training with 3 horses.
I've been lucky enough to be in America, and I think standing near to where you began training with just one box or just a
No, it was right where the horses are kept in the International Barn.
Yes.
At Santa Anita. It was right beside, there was 3 stalls, as they call them, underneath a staircase. And so the very quiet Matt Chapman asked me to do it, and I said, that's where I started, and pointed at the 3 boxes. And look, it was 1978, 79. And luckily Steve Corton was there riding as a young man, and he rode my first winner for me.
The 2 horses that we feel define your time in California were Bates Motel and Royal Heroine. I'll start with Bates Motel, because I think you've been quoted as saying, for any trainer to try and make it, you need that first good horse. Just tell us a story about how you started training Bates Motel, how you got hold of him.
Well, at the time I'd gone from 3 to 6, because Robert Sankster very kindly sent me some fillies, which were basically to race in the winter and then go into Kentucky to be bred on March the 1st. And I got a phone call from Jackie Getty, whom I'd known through Sir Noel Murless. She'd come to the stables with Charles St. George. She said, look, we got this colt by Sir Ivor, would you train him? Well, when you've got 6 horses, the answer of course is yes. I would. Well, would you go and see him? I said, sure. And I thought, well, what's coming next? Well, look, they didn't want him Henry Cecil didn't want him, kicked him out, and he said he didn't want him at all to train, and he's now in South Carolina. I thought, oh, here we go. So I said, sure, I'll go and look at him. So I went across. I'm back at the bus, sleeping on the floor in the airport, to South Carolina. I went to see this horse. Now, it doesn't matter where he's got 3 legs, we're going to go for this. And there's this guy with very bright red pants and a yellow shirt there. Looked like he was off for a round of golf, leaning on the rail. I got over. And this horse went by, big, huge horse, flop ears and blinkers on. And he said, that's your horse. And I thought, well, he looked like Santa Monica Pier going by. Anyhow, he said, there's something about this horse. He's ignorant. He's not a nice person. But there's something about him, boy. And I said, are you going to take him? I said, well, of course I'm going to take him. That man happened to be Lucien Laurent,
Wow.
who'd retired trained secretariat. And he had had a few young horses he had on a track down there. So, a long story, the horse came back, and he was a delinquent. He was right. He was so backward and weak. I breezed him on Christmas Eve. He breezed well, went 36 and change over 3 furlongs at Santa Anita, and then brailed him through the year, and he took about 8 runs to break his maiden. All he wanted to do was come out the gate, lug left, onto the rail and try and get the jockey. Straight 2 boots off Razor Bill. And he was a difficult horse and in the end I thought, we've got to geld him. You can't geld him. So, okay, I can't geld him. So we carried on. Finally, we did sort him out. He won a maiden, and then I took him up to Bay Meadows, San Francisco. There's no racing in San Francisco now. All the tracks are gone, but Bay Meadows, and he won a nice stakes race there. And won it well, and that was the beginning. Suddenly he took off, and from there he went on to being champion older horse, Eclipse Award winner as a 4-year-old. But as I did always say that if he'd been a human being, he'd have been in federal prison in California, not on a racetrack.
And of course, in those days, the big race in America, outside the classics, the Santa Anita Handicap was the big race, no Breeders' Cup.
No Breeders' Cup. It was the biggest race in America, actually, for a long time, and more valuable than the Kentucky Derby. Yeah, and he won that in some style. I mean, he swept wide on what we call an off-track. The rain had been there, and swept wide. Nearly broke the track record on an off-track. Couldn't believe it. But very talented horse. Did a good job as a stallion, good broodmare sire. But in the end, he needed 2 handlers, like alleged.
Wow.
He turned a little bit savage. Yeah.
I presume you had seen Psycho as well, because I mean, some of the younger viewers wouldn't even know Bates Motel.
No, they wouldn't. Yeah. No, exactly. Well, he was living up to the name, wasn't he? Yeah, Mr. Perkins.
Yeah. And Royal Heroine, who actually I think was here in the UK.
Yeah, she was. Look, it was Mick Ryan had bought her for I think 9,000 guineas, and Mick trained her, and then Robert Sangster bought her, and she went to Michael. Yeah. And she ran some lovely races for him. And then he sent her over, and we ran her in the Hollywood Derby under sort of both of our names, and she won that. And then we put her away, and she came back the next year, and she was a brilliant filly in that to look at her, Mick obviously saw something, but she was not obvious. Yeah. When a horse walks, it is meant to swing the hind foot through ahead of where the front foot lands. She just had no action. It's like she was permanently set fast. She couldn't walk, she couldn't trot very well, but gallop. When she galloped, the stretch on her was amazing. And she wound up breaking the American record, 132.1 for the mile at Hollywood Park, and got in big fights with a filly called Sabin, trained by Woody Stevens. Then it became a real head-to-head duel, who's going to be the champion. And she had tremendous class. Fernando Toro rode her, and she wound up beating Sabin in both the big races, all before the Breeders' Cup.
What was that occasion like, that first Breeders' Cup, and to have a winner on that?
It was extraordinary, because the crowd, they ran out of food. They ran out of programs. They had no idea that people were going to be so fascinated by it. I was with Prince Khaled Abdullah, and all there was a man called Mr. Surin Vanyan with him, and he ate all the rolls on the table. and that was all there was, and we ran out of cards, race cards. And look, it was great racing. It was a hell of a finish to the Classic. Yeah. It was a huge success in the sunshine. I've always wished they'd keep it in California, but I prefer the bigger tracks like Santa Anita than Del Mar. It's a bit tight.
You're clearly settled and successful and presumably happy in America. You move on, you get a phone call, I'm guessing, or contact from Sheikh Mohammed, and he offers you the job to come back to England and train at Stanley House. Was that a difficult decision to come back? Yeah,
it was very difficult actually. It was probably most difficult for Rachel, because she was already doing extremely well in her business, but we had intended to go there for 1 year and had stayed 11. And the kids were at that stage where, should the family be back here? And I thought it was all right, we'll give it a go for a year, why not? So we'll come back and always come back again. And I will admit that for 4 or 5 years I regretted the decision. But in the end, things turn around. I mean, don't get me wrong, Stanley House is a lovely place to train, but it was the beginning of the breeding program, and you don't put a broodmare band together in a hurry, and it was a lot of experimenting going on. So hoping to get a higher quality of horse didn't come through immediately. In fact, so when we finally did win the Derby, it was with my one surviving American owner with just one horse in England.
But
in the end, it came through.
Well, a year before that, it is a very significant, as you say, there may have been teething problems, but they gave you your first classic winner with Shantou in '96, I think it was.
Yeah, with Frankie on board up at Doncaster.
And looking, he wasn't, this is in high, reading what he'd done beforehand, he's not your obvious ledger caddy. He didn't go for the obvious trials. I think
No, I remember going to the stud farm and he got left out. He was a wobbler.
Okay.
He said he was a wobbler and behind, and then in the end I was over there one day and I said, what about this wobbler here? Well, we're not going to do it. I said, we'll send him over. And he came through the whole thing. Again, Dettori was the only person who could get him to go. No other jockey could really get him. Mick Kinane rode him at Ascot and things, but somehow he understood the horse and could get everything out of him. He won the Grand Premio de Milano, which was a very long night down there with Frankie afterwards. That's when it was worth a fortune. And he wasn't obvious. I mean, he prepped at Windsor in a conditions race. Yeah, exactly. But Mr. Dettori with him, it was an extraordinary combination. You had to train him entirely on his own with one other horse. Don't have him near the string. He used to go half mad. He was a very difficult horse. But he's turned out a pretty good national hunt stallion in the end.
Yeah, he has.
I wanted to ask you about that moment in your career, because I hope you don't mind me mentioning this. There was an article, I think it was in the Sporting Life, written with the headline, "How Good is Gosden?" questioning your record since you'd come back. And then obviously came Shantou and a few other winners. But at the time, I presume...
It wasn't, no, I can assure you it wasn't a particularly easy time. I think everybody faces challenges. I was having a lot of problems that the horses coming in, the homebreds, weren't what they were cracked up to be. In fact, they were so small you could sometimes fit two in a box. So it was a difficult time, but you just keep your head down, you keep working hard, stick to the principles, don't panic, don't try and turn everything upside down, and it'll come round in the end.
Yeah, Benny the Dip helped it to turn around in '97.
Absolutely. He was more traditional. He won the Dantes, didn't he, before going there?
Yeah.
And he was a really exciting derby that he won. I mean, I remember watching it and not knowing who won. People who got rid of silver patch.
It was an interesting story coming into it because, I didn't have a jockey, obviously, retained for him. Frankie was then with Godolphin, having been with us. And so Olivier Pellier rode him in the Dante. And then he was claimed to ride in France. Then Frankie was going to ride him. And at the last moment, Godolphin thought they'd run a 200-to-1 shot, which they did. So I'm left without a jockey. So he said, what should we do? I said, what about Willie Ryan? I said, great, let's go get Willie. And Willie, what are you doing tomorrow? I said, come and ride a horse on Warren Hill. Why? I said, look, it's 3 days till the Derby. I'm not going to work him. I'd like you to sit on it. So he sat on him, did his duty bit, and I phoned up Mr. Land at night. I said, I've got a good jockey, very good jockey. What's his name? I said, Willie Ryan. He said, I can't find him on the list. I said, well, don't worry, he's just a good horseman. And he rode him beautifully because the horse had a great balance. And he always, the way he used him to go there and be bold, he was rolling down the hill, moving through, he said, right, I'm going to go. And I think probably it won him the race because Pat Heddery got rather stranded. His horse didn't come down the horse with Silver Patriarch, did he?
Yeah.
John Dunlop, Pat Heddery. Came flying at the finish. But we held on.
And to be fair, he's not the best horse you've trained, but he went on to prove a genuine Group 1 horse. He was runner-up to Pilsudski in an Eclipse, and he's run well in
a...
Absolutely.
With Kieran Fallon, the Wattic side wanted to kill him.
Yes, absolutely.
Going up the end.
Absolutely. And placing the Jub Monte. I mean, he was a genuine Group 1 horse, wasn't he?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And for you, John, having obviously, you mentioned Charlottetown a couple of times to win the Derby. What was that day?
Well, for the family, it meant a lot. Yeah, for me, it was sort of unfinished business for my father. I used to go up on the Downs at Lewis every work morning to watch Charlottetown, and it's a great pity that he didn't hang on. But at the time, the Duke of Norfolk wanted to move the trainer on from Arundel, which was another story altogether, and so he offered to buy the stable and all the horses, the owners there. So my father felt it's the right thing to do with young kids and a dodgy ticker. But I think it was unfinished family business, so it was lovely to have done it, yeah.
After the Stanley House era, you went to Manton. How did that come about, and what were the machinations of that?
Well, it was just that Robert was having a slightly difficult time. That he was a wonderful man to train for, a very kind man, and he had a great rule. You train the horses, I don't interfere. And so he always said, when I get on a plane, I don't go and tell the pilot how to fly it. And he just said, look, I think I'd like to make a change at Manton. Would you be available? And I thought, We had a good relationship. I trained a lot of nice horses from in America. I said, absolutely no problem. And I think it was not a difficult decision to make. And I always wanted to train at a place like that. It was quite a load to take on because it's all broken up into parts now. But then it was just one very big 2,200 acres. And we brought 125 horses from Newmarket down there and then filled the place up and got on with it. And Robert at that time was a little bit having to leave his nice colts in Ireland, keep a leg, and send some of the others over, some of the fillies and such like. So one wasn't getting the cream of his crop, that was staying in Ballydoyle. But that was obviously financially had to be understood that Robert needed the cash flow. So he needed outside horses in to keep Manton, if you like, washing its face. But it suited me to have a change. It's a nice part of the world. It is a big place to run. I did find it quite a weight on the shoulders, but now it's sort of broken up into different parts, and it's probably less overhead because it's handled by many different entities now. But certainly in that day, it was a lovely place to train, great part of the world. And I think I was ready for a change. I don't think I'd ever in my life wanted to have trained in the same place all my life. I don't think I would have got a bit bored.
Why is that? What?
I just have a rather low boredom threshold that way, and I love the challenge of America and then coming here to Newmarket. And we trained over 100 group winners when I was in Newmarket, over 1,000 winners in the first time here. But in the end, I needed to move on, a fresh challenge. Go and train on downland rather than heathland, having trained on American dirt tracks. Yeah. It's all a challenge. And I really enjoyed those 5-6 years at Manton. And then where we are now, very tragically, Alec had died. He wasn't even 50. And it was up for sale, it was too expensive. And then it had a year, it was being rented, I think. And then it was available again. And this is the time I thought, Rachel and I looked at each other and said, look, we are rather in danger of what the old opera singers say, living the life of an international gypsy, wandering place to place. And we thought it's about time we got our act together and bought somewhere. So that's when we then came here.
One of the first good horses you had at Manton was Lahan, who won the Guineas. Really talented filly. What were your memories of what she did? Owned
by one of the nicest men you could ever meet. Lovely man, Sheikh Hamdan. And he, like Sheikh Mohammed, I mean, Sheikh Hamdan had 5 horses with me, and she was one of them. And Sheikh Mohammed about 6, and they came down with me to Manton. They didn't say, you're going to Manton, bye-bye. Not at all. They stayed with us, which just shows what incredible owners they've been for British racing. And I remember Sheikh Mohammed and Sheikh Hamdan both coming down and seeing the place. And Sheikh Hamdan had nearly bought it for Dick Hearn. But the deal fell through at the last moment. Okay. But Dick then wound up going where he did go. They sort of built that place for him, but he was nearly at Manton. Sheikh Mohammed came down to see it out of interest. Prince Khalid bin Abdullah came down. He said, "This jeep is very bouncy. The gallops are too right now." I said, "No, it's my driving, sir. Don't worry." But they all came down, and they all had horses there, so it was a happy feeling. And Lahan was great to win the Guineas. And then we had Prince Khalid's horse, Oasis Dream.
Oh. Yes, we'll touch on her in a bit. Just one more horse the same year as Lahan, who, it's not so much the horse, although he was very good, it's more the race. Observatory, he trained the same year as Lahan, in the year 2000. And people will remember particularly the QE2 where he beat Giant's Causeway. Much has been made of the tactics coming wide because Giant's Causeway was noticeably tough. And was that a plan hatched before?
It had to be, because Giant's Causeway, having watched him beat horses in the, particularly in the Eclipse, I think. Yeah. You challenged and head him, he looked you and he'd come back, grit his teeth. So we said to Kevin before, I said, look, the plan is, Kevin, come wide and late. Well, he came wide and he came late and got it spot on. Won by half a length. I think Giant's Causeway saw him too late and the horse thought he'd won the race. When he was an iron horse, so to beat him that way was something. And then the filly, Crystal Music, for the Lloyd Webbers won the Fillies Mile that same afternoon.
Great day, yeah. But it's a memorable race. Years on, people still talk about it. You just mentioned Oasis Dream, or you did touch on. Would that be fair to say the best sprinter you've ever trained?
Yeah, he would have been. I was lucky at Stanley House, had some lovely sprinters there. Keen Hunter, Cat Rail, Wolfhound, all top group sprinters. But this boy was the best.
Yeah.
And he won a Middle Park, and then he got a little bit sick in the beginning of his 3-year-old year. And I had the only difficult conversation I ever had with Prince Khalid Abdullah when I said, look, I'm going to run him at Ascot, first time up, but I'd like to run him in the King's Stand. No, John, he's bred to go a mile. You must run him in the St. James Palace. I said, please, sir, I want to run him in the King's Stand. And the conversation went on for half an hour because Prince Khalid knew every pedigree in his book. He knew his stud book backwards. In the end, he said, he has to run well and he has to win his next race. What will that be? I said, July Cup. Very good. End of conversation. He did run well. He was third. He got a little tired. He came back and thank goodness he won the July Cup. Defeating
Choisier, who you reversed. Yeah, it's a very good year, actually.
It was a good year for me. Choisier won the King's Stand and we managed to turn it on with Richard Hughes riding. Timed his run beautifully. I always feel that slight, wonderful rise on the July course suited our boy best.
But you showed versatility because you dropped back to 5 and won the Nunthorpe.
Won the Nunthorpe.
So he really was a good sprinter.
No, he was fast. And they always said he'd broken the track record in Nunthorpe, except Mr. Abdullah complained that Richard Hughes was looking at himself in the camera with a laugh, saying how good he looked as he went by. He should have been riding it faster. We'd have broken the track record.
No, he was. Yeah, I say he was a proper star.
And he's proven a good stallion, a good broodmare star too.
Yeah. Then you moved on to
where you are now, at Clarehaven, and having gone through your 3 previous bases, most people will be happy with what they've done so far.
Yeah.
But it's quite incredible, and Steve and I both agree on this sentiment, that when we were looking through it, we hadn't quite realised just what an enormous amount of success you've had from here. And there will be horses that won't make this final list that we might give an honourable mention to, but we'll start spinning through all the horses from Clarehaven. And once you moved in, one of the early successes, big successes, came courtesy of a horse called Raven's Pass. Now, we'll come to some of the races that he won. I'd like to start by some of the races we felt he could have won. Maybe the St James's Palace Stakes, maybe the Sussex. Felt that he was never really appreciated for just what a good horse he was. That blooming Henry the Navigator was standing in front of him.
Yeah. No, it's true. I mean, I think the Sussex was one that got away. Yeah. That's for sure. But, there's no point pouring over the coals. I think Jimmy and we knew that afterwards. But he rode him beautifully when he won the QE2. The most difficult decision for me then was the fact that, Frankie was riding for Godolphin. Jimmy had ridden for me for the time I was down at Manton. And what do I do? What do I do now? Jimmy had never ridden in America. And you go and ride stone cold into a Breeders' Cup Classic and you haven't ridden in America, it's a disadvantage. And so I then discussed it with the owners, and the McNairs were very clear they wanted an American jockey. They didn't want a UK jockey at all. So I had to have a bit of a battle. I said, no, I got a man who's very good with America. I couldn't put, obviously I couldn't put Jimmy forward then. It was impossible for Jimmy because he'd never ridden there. And then I managed to get Frankie on the horse. And it's, he very nearly messed it up by trying to pull the blind off too soon. The horse was powerful at the gate, nearly broke through the gate. But in the end, it was the right decision. And a hard decision to make, but I thought, I'll have Frankie ahead of an American any day. And he rode him quite beautifully, covered him up, gave him every chance, and we luckily blew Henry the Navigator away. Which was,
but a Breeders' Cup Classic at Santini, I think Curlin was back in
Curlin
third.
Curlin was back and forth. Mr. Jackson was not a happy bunny, no.
Was he a horse who got better, or was he a horse you felt you learnt more about what he wanted? Because my memory, and I might be wrong here, you started riding him slightly more positively after the Sussex Stakes.
Yeah.
He came late, didn't he, and didn't get there in the Sussex, I think, anyway. And the challenge was slightly earlier the next time.
Yeah, it was. I think the feeling was he could be so aggressive, you had to hold him up. Otherwise, he'd over-race early. And we overdid the holding up tactics, so both the St James Palace and the Sussex. We got it spot on in the QE too.
Yeah.
And look, he was a very powerful horse. He didn't like the ground. The ground had gone and got loose and wet in the Dewhurst. He didn't like it in the Dewhurst. I think, where did he finish? Third?
Yes, I think it was,
third. He didn't like it. But as soon as he had fast ground, or something he put his foot down, knew where it was, he was a top-class horse. You'd have made a wonderful 4-year-old, but he went straight off to stud.
Yeah. Yeah. Very highly rated at the end. I think 129. I think was the official mark. Which is getting to proper stuff.
No, he had some burst of speed. He really did.
A few years later, and I'll be honest, it's a favourite of mine. Again, it wouldn't be your absolute best horse, but certainly top class, was Nathaniel, who happened to be lucky enough to be there on his debut, and unlucky enough for you, Frank was there as well. And that was sort of a bit of a nemesis for him a few times. But in his own right, what a CV Nathaniel had.
He was a wonderful horse. He was brave.
Absolutely.
He's done very nicely at stud. He's had Derby and an Oaks when
Yeah.
But he liked to just, that night on the Friday, I was in Deauville sales, and my assistant phoned me and said, there's a 3-year-old just walked into the paddock. I said, what do you mean? It's a 2-year-old, 7 furlong maiden. It was Frank. Powerful horse, he's anything like it. Well, we only went down half a length.
Yeah.
And they both had to be, neither of them had what I call a hard race. No jockeys going, but they both had to be well squeezed up. And I vowed then I'd never take him on again until the very end. And so we went through our career, and he winning an Eclipse and a King George, and he was always a grand horse, always up for it, very brave. And then, frustratingly, he got sick before the Arc, and the Arc was bottomless and not a good Arc that year, and he'd have adored that. And so we brought him back for his last race in the Champion. Guess who we bumped?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And he wasn't a mile and a quarter, and he wasn't at his best. He ran a great race to be third. But you're right, we've jolly well avoided him after that.
Well, you had a great CV anyway, as you say, an Eclipse, a King George, a King Edward, I think.
Edward.
It was it's in his own right, he was a really top-class horse. Very right, so extremely consistent.
And he was only beaten that far in a second King George by Daydream, both inside the track record.
Yeah, absolutely.
What would have been the pick of his performances, do you think? Because obviously I thought dropping back in trip for the Eclipse.
I think the Eclipse, and I thought William rode him that day, and he rode him quite beautifully. Yeah, that would have been the best. And that wasn't a bad one, trying to chase him down.
The next horse we'll talk about, and I don't know how he didn't finish his career unbeaten, one of the fastest milers I think we can remember in recent times, Kingman. What was your first impression when you started putting him through his paces?
Interesting enough, he was a lazy horse. And William worked him one day and said, not much of a feel here. And William had to be somewhere he wasn't able to ride, and I thought, I'll run him anyhow. He needs a race to wake him up. Put him on the Shalaa course, ridden by Ryan Moore, 6 lengths. Right, so this is some machine. But what he did at home, and what he would do at home, he'd just waddle around the place, do his first canter. And his first canter, you would be slightly embarrassed to point out who he was, and being a plain babe, it's fine. Then he did his second canter, he put more effort into it. And he was one of those horses, all he wanted to do was do what he had to do. He'd go 3 lengths clear, drop the lot, come back, eat, sleep. It's an odd thing that some of his stock are a bit highly strung, but that's come from the father and the grandfather, not from him. But to that extent, he'd fooled us, and we were going for the Group 1. Obviously, he went and won the Solaria, and we were going for the Group 1 in France, and he came up with a little problem with an ankle, and we couldn't run him. The next year, I suppose, he was brilliant in the Greenham, and I think he just did his usual thing when he came to the Guineas. James Doyle rode him. He kicked clear. He'd gone clear, and he did what he'd do at home. Oh, that's it then. Fine, I'll have a kip now. Started putting himself up, and Kieran across and did him half a length. We put it right in the St James Palace, and he won the Irish Guineas in between time. But he was a brilliant horse, but he was what you call push the button. Yeah. But for goodness sake, not that you didn't have to touch him with the stick, just you had to keep saying, the moment he thought you said he'd done it, bloop, he dropped the lot. He was a very amusing horse, a very kind horse, making into an exciting stallion. He really is. And I think, really, when you look at his career, he would be a long way the best miler I've ever trained. Oasis Dream, the best sprinter, him the best miler.
And there's also a bit of satisfaction for you on a personal level, having known the family so well. And his dam.
Well, the dam is interesting because she was my Zender. And I was running something in St. Cloud, and Prince Carl Abdul was there, and I said, I've got this filly. She's one little maiden, but do you mind if I put her in the French Guineas? No, she'll be a high price, but I put her in the French Guineas, said, if you want to, do it. She duly won She duly won with Richard Hughes on board the French Guineas. And then, of course, she produces something like... And when you get in those families and you've known the mother, the father, the brother, the uncle, the aunt, it's a huge help as a trainer, because you tend not to make the same mistake twice if you know about it.
Must be satisfying as well, I would have thought,
Yeah.
to see the offspring of...
Extremely satisfying.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Very much.
Not a child, but you must get
Yeah.
fond of them, I would have thought.
Very much so.
And it's Tagruda on the outside of Jordan Princess. These two from Sound Reflection. The other trio cannot get on terms, and Tagruda moves through and leads and begins to come away. Jordan Princess, Uchenna is running on, but a place looks best that she can hope for, and Tagruda is extending well. She came with a tall reputation. She made a big impression here last season, and she's 2 from 2 after winning the Pretty Polly. It is Tagruda who's moved through the lead. Tarfasha, Volume, Inchilla running a massive race, trying to thread the needle. Tagruda it is who leads with over a furlong to go by a couple of legs from Volume. Tarfasha, Inchilla out of luck. Itimal stays on, but this at the moment is a 1 filly race, and that 1 filly is Tagruda, unbeaten, and Tagruda makes it 3 out of 3 and wins the Investing Oaks.
I couldn't remember just how spectacular Tagruda was in the first half of the season. She didn't just win races, she took a field apart in the Pretty Polly, wide margin winner of the Oaks, wide margin winner of the King George. Again, she was, spectacular in her day, wasn't she?
Absolutely. She was a big, strong girl.
Yeah.
And she won her. She did well at 1 run as a 2-year-old. She didn't need more. And yes, she was completely dominant here in the listed race at Newmarket. And I suppose her run in the Oaks, she just flew.
Yeah.
And he didn't have to do much, just point out she'd gone. And she was, I think at that stage she could have beaten most of the colts, pretty well all the colts. She was one of those fillies that was so strong and so ahead of the probably should have run her in the Derby, but it doesn't matter. She was one of those. We had a blip at York.
Yeah.
Never quite worked that one out yet. But it was, afterwards. But the King George, she just slew that field, didn't she?
She did. I mean, the York Funny, we will touch it obviously with other horses later, but it's got a history of having some surprises, hasn't it? The Jubmonte, going way back to British Gerard losing his unbeaten record. But Tagruda was a long odds-on favourite that day. But to be fair to her, she went on to run very well in an Arc later in the season. It wasn't as if she went completely off the boil.
She had a terrible draw in the Arc, didn't she?
Yes,
as well?
very bad.
She had a horrible draw, and I think Paul Hannigan slightly got unfairly blamed for that. It's the old story with that draw. There's 3 ways of handling it. You either drop across and hope to get lucky up the rail, you drop across and come with a late run, or you do what Frankie did on Golden Horn. But he got hurled wide all the way. Look, she was a brilliant third, and the first and the second had dream trips.
Yeah.
What can you do? That's the Arc. It can be a cruel race that way. And I think Paul got, I don't think the owner was best pleased, but it was, from that draw, it can happen there. But I think her run in the King George and the Oaks was the zenith. He did have a policy then, Sheikh Hamdan, that no 4-year-old filly stayed in training.
Right.
And I begged him 2 years later to keep an old filly called Enbihar in training. And she won 3 Group 2s or something as a 4-year-old. And he quietly said to me, I wish I'd kept Tagruda in training another year. But his father told him, at 3, that's it, you stop. They then have to be for breeding. You cannot use up all of their resources. They are now for breeding. So he was only doing what his father told him to do. But he always felt with Tagruda that was the one he should have kept in training.
Yeah.
To that point, I imagine she would have ranked very highly amongst your staying middle distance fillies that you've had to train.
On her day, there would be nothing between her and the Naval. On their day. On the day together, 2 fillies. They were both hugely powerful.
Yeah.
And the colts would look at them and go, oh, Christ, she's quite frightening.
The complexion changes as Golden Horn now begins to run at his stable companion. Golden Horn and Jack Hobbs, the intense moment in the Derby, and Golden Horn looks like putting it to bed. Jack Hobbs trying to stay in the game, tightened up, and it is Golden Horn driven out, remains unbeaten. Golden Horn won the Derby.
It's Golden Horn. The Grey Gatsby still can only get to his throat latch in second. 3 lengths away, Cougar Mountain and Western Hymn. Golden Horn battles gamely and now has pulled a length and a half over the Grey Gatsby. His braking is hard and it will be Golden Horn. A perfect 5 out of 5. Golden Horn has won the Eclipse.
Frankie now has gone from push to shove. Free Eagle. Found is making ground right up behind them on the outside. Now switch to the centre. Golden Horn boxing on the rail. Free Eagle towards the near side. Then neck and neck. Golden Horn has swerved right over towards the near side, but leads Free Eagle and Found as they run towards the finish. It's Golden Horn. He's lugging towards the stand side, but Golden Horn has won the Quipco Irish Champion Stakes.
And this is it now, the home straight in the arc. Trev towards the right, begins to make a move. Golden Horn and New Bay are the front two though. Here comes Trev, then Free Eagle and Dolnear. They're heading down with 300 metres to go. Golden Horn in front, and it's Golden Horn and Frankie Dettori from Flincher in second place. Trev is on the outside in third, trying to close. Golden Horn though is answering every call from Frankie, and it's Golden Horn who's going to win the arc.
Steve and I, we love to tell everyone that actually we worked at Nottingham the day he made his debut, and we thought we looked at a future Derby winner, ARC winner at the time.
Yeah,
we could tell. In all seriousness, when he won, it was quite an impressive start to his career because William Haggas had a horse called Storm the Stars in the race. It was a short price favourite. We thought it would be a straightforward task. But he created some impression first time up. Did you expect that straight off the bat?
Again, he was a little bit of a laid-back lad. He'd done a lovely piece of work on the lime kilns in August with Jack Hobbs. And they both flew together, clear of the lead horse. And I think they took each other on, and they couldn't pull him up till the traffic lights. And they both came back the next morning off behind. Both laying behind, both had we call little tibia activity. It's a very common thing. That is why they didn't run, one till November, and the other ran on December the 27th. But we knew he had a lot of ability. I thought the ground, he'd be lucky if he'd just go and run on and do well, but he was impressive that day. And we knew then we got something, because it wasn't his favourite ground. He never really liked it soft.
And thereby, at the start of the season, did you consider him a Derby horse immediately, or did you allow him just to develop and then see how it panned out?
Well, it was the old time when William had gone to Godolphin, because obviously... And then Frankie didn't have any kind of retainers, anything. So it was Remembrance Sunday of 2014, and we got the call that William was going to Godolphin. And so, talking to Rachel, she said, well, why didn't you call Frankie? See if he'll be available. And funny enough, Frankie's wife had said to him, why didn't you call John? Anyhow, I beat him to the phone. And I said, look, what do you, well, I said, right, you keep your mouth shut. I'll see you on March the 1st and say nothing to anyone. It's no one's bloody business. And he came in on March the 1st, and first horse I put him on was Golden Horn. And he rode him around Waterhall and other things. He won the field, and I said, what about the Guineas? He said, no, John, he is not seasoned enough for a Guineas. And they said, what do you want to go for? He said, Dante. But I'll ride the other one. I said, okay, fine. You're the jockey, you tell me not to go for the Guineas, we'll go for the Dante. So then William Buick rode him in the Dante, in Mr. Oppenheimer's colour. And Frankie rode in my wife's colours on Jack Hobbs. And of course, Jack Hobbs is a lovely horse, but he couldn't handle that, couldn't handle Golden Horn in the last furlong.
And then, of course, it swapped around. Jack Hobbs went to the Derby in the Godolphin Blue, William Buick is riding him, Frankie on Golden Horn in the Derby. It was a very smooth Derby for you to watch, I presume.
Not really, because first of all, understandably, Mr. Oppenheimer's opinion that the horse's pedigree was that of a miler, and he was right. So he said the supplement, I said he's just earned it in Dante. He said, in that case, we will supplement. And he said, right, the Derby, we're going for it. But I don't think he'll stay. I remember him saying, I don't think he'll stay. I said, well, you're probably right. So in the race, when they're coming to 2 furlong marker, and Jack, although he's not enjoying the camber with William, goes forward, and I thought, oh my God. And Frankie, I just saw, had got a little active, nothing was happening. I thought, this is going to outstay, this would be very embarrassing. You know, with another owner, and then, you know, the wife's horse or something. And then, of course, suddenly, Frankie galloped past, and he exploded. And it was a phenomenal turn of foot. And then we're getting all the waving and the cheering, and I'm the king and all of that. But look, it was to have the first and second at Derby with different owners, one a homebred, one bought at the sales for 60 grand. I mean, that's what it's about. It's as exciting as it gets.
A different feeling, I suppose, from Benny the Dip with the first and second in the Derby this time round?
Yeah, I think Frankie felt the same. It was his second Derby, and he always said he enjoyed this one. he could really enjoy it, because the first one he said he was in a haze. This one he definitely enjoyed. He went around kissing everyone. Poor Mr. Oppenheimer must have thought he was I won't say, but it was a tremendous win. And then, of course, what do we all have to do now? We have to go straight to the Eclipse to prove that they're not mile-and-a-half horses. And yet the Japanese, they don't mind. Yeah. Deep Impact ran over 2 miles. I mean, what is all of this speed with us? We're getting worse than the Americans. Golden Horn, having said that, we all thought he wouldn't stay a mile and a half. He goes and wins the Irish Champion, mile and a quarter fine, and then he gets the ride of the century. From Frankie. Frankie and I always used to walk the tracks together, always, before the Arc. Why? Because it kept me out of a lunch, being asked too many questions, which is a good thing. Secondly, it just was good for his nerves. We'd go around with the jockey agents, and he stood in the stall. He said, look down the track. So I looked down the track, and when you look down the track, the rail comes out slightly by the petit bois. And he said, I'm going to take that line, take that line, take that line, I'm going to stay out there. If I ask to come in, they're not going to let me in. They'll give me the elbow. And I'll wait and I'll wait and I'll wait till up by there, and then I'll slip across. Well, it went, he couldn't have done that to the horse when he was younger because he was too keen. But the horse floated along on the outside. He had a lot of racing, more seasoned then. And of course, he went and slotted right behind Trev's pacemaker. Perfect spot. And then he said, in the straight, I'd have my breather down the hill. I kicked. And he said, you have to go then, Jean, because they come like arrows at your back. But it was, it's a classically brilliant ride.
For a man who had won as many big races as he had, after the race, what struck me most was the fact that he said he'd never gone that fast in the final 2 furlongs of a Group 1 race over a mile and a half. Did that surprise you at all? Or?
I think the fact that he'd, in a strange way, by being out there, he'd done his own pace, come across, got a breather and exploded. And he had that phenomenal turn of foot. And it's an extraordinary thing for a horse who no one thought would ever get a mile and a half, is now the sort of coming national hunt stallion.
Yes.
In sad in a way, but fantastic that he is. But he's owned by a lady now that she's going to keep the book set at, I think, 160, and that's it. And none of these sort of 275, 300 mares. And I think from that point of view, he deserves a fantastic home. But he certainly bucked his pedigree, that's for sure.
2 races I wanted to ask you about. One, the defeat at York by Arabian Queen. What was the story there? And by the time he got to the Breeders' Cup, maybe was it the end of the season? I mean, he still ran well.
No, I think it was a bit of a mess up at York. We'd had a couple of little minor issues. They were all fine. We seemed fine for the race. But I knew I was in trouble when my wife's horse, Dick Doughty Wiley, acting as a pacemaker, was still in front with 2 to run. I thought, now Houston, we got a problem here. He did brilliantly, obviously, in the Irish Champion after that, and he did brilliantly in the Arc. We went to, I walked the track in September at Kingman. Sadly, the track was fine, but it's sand and loose. They raced a lot on it. It then got about 4 inches of rain, and you might as well have been in a sand pit. And he hated it. He was spinning his wheels. He's still only beaten a neck, beaten by Aiden's filly. He wasn't on Lasix or anything, she was. And he gets beaten to neck, giving £3. So I think if the track had remained as it should have been, he'd have won that. But it's not an easy thing from the Arc to the Breeders' Cup anyhow. But I swear if it had been run at Santa Anita on good to firm, on firm ground, he'd have flown.
One question I just want to ask you, just off the back of Kingman, Tagruda and Golden Horn, before we move on to other horses. Horses staying unbeaten. We sometimes think trainers like to protect that, and it's something important to them. I mean, I often think, like Kingman, I wish he'd stayed unbeaten, just from a fan's point of view, because he was such a brilliant horse. Tagruda got beaten, obviously, at a short price at York, and then ran a great race in the Arc. I mean, is that something that ever bothers you, whether horses get beat or not, when they're that good? Or
I think if they're highly intelligent and they're used to winning, you can sometimes see that in their demeanour for the next few days. They know. But if they've been ridden perfectly and it's just happened that way, beaten by a better horse, no. It's never bothered me. I think if you have to go out thinking, I never want to be beaten, then you're never really going to be brave and let the horse express itself and go places that people say, maybe you shouldn't do that. Are you logical doing that? I think when you feel the horse is right, and you know, I've got a fantastic staff here, and riders and senior people, and all the messages and tunes are coming right, you know, go for it. And don't be worried if when you did, you actually went in a race where you were beaten. there's no shame in being beaten. You look at all the great boxing fighters, what they go through. You know, the champions, they lose their championship, they come back. I admire them all the more when they've done that. And theirs is a hard game, when you've been actually hit and beaten by someone in a boxing ring. So I always admire the ones who get up out the dust and come back. So it's never the idea of being unbeaten. Frankel was unbeaten. He deserved to be unbeaten. But Henry wasn't well. Henry didn't want to go travelling into America and travelling to France and everything. He was happy where he was. I did say, if you go for the Sussex Stakes again, we're all going to start yawning. But, you know, he made me watch the horse every morning, and the horse was going, right, John, he's good. I said, hang on, mine are coming. I haven't got time for that, he said, he'd be gone. But every day I was watching him. He tamed the horse. He didn't train him. He tamed him. It's a very different thing. I shouldn't talk about other people's horses, but when he was in behind and he behaved and he relaxed and he was allowed to go in front, the moment he was, like a naughty boy, he's put back there again. And he richly tamed that horse.
Wow. You touched on the horse earlier when we talked about a gallop with Golden Horn. He obviously used to gallop with Jack Hobbs. Talk about what he gone on to do, you know, wide margin winner of the Irish Derby. What a good thing he was off 85 in a handicap at Sandown.
He was a very good thing, and he won like it that
He
day.
certainly did.
That's when the bids started flying in, yeah. They only worked together as 2-year-olds. They never worked together again after that, because they both overdid themselves.
Yeah.
Like two exuberant young men.
Yeah. But he must have been proud to win that, because obviously he wasn't as good as Golden Horn, but he still had his moment in the sun in Ireland, didn't he?
Yes, he did brilliantly there. He won the Irish Derby as he pleased.
Yep.
He went and won the Shima Classic, which was a great effort. He did suffer an injury in the Jockey Club Stakes, and I felt he battled to be the same after that. But he was a fabulous horse. You wouldn't mind buying a horse like that for £60,000 again.
Yeah.
Both riders going for everything, and Enable is just getting on top from Rhododendron inside the final furlong. Enable kicks 2 lengths clear of the favourite and racing up towards the line. Enable for a 4th Oaks win for Frankie Dettori in the colours of Talent Abdullah, and Enable wins the Oaks.
But it's Enable, the long odds-on favourite, out in front of Rain Goddess. Azira stays on, and then comes Aurora Butterfly, but up towards the finish. Enable is going to win the Double Oaks, wins in great style, completes the Oaks double for Frankie Dettori and John Gosden.
Enable still the leader, edging towards the far side of the track, but is clear by 6 lengths here. And Enable, this brilliant filly, will complete an Oaks treble and maintains her winning run in brilliant style all the way. Winner of the Darley Yorkshire Oaks, Enable and Frankie Dettori.
And here goes Enable and Frankie Dettori, kick to the front, and Enable goes on. And it is Enable who opens up by a couple of lengths. Ulysses in pursuit in second position, but it's looking like vain pursuit because Enable's gone 3 clear. On the outside, Cloth of Stars finishes like a bullet. And Ulysses in third position, but it's Enable who's crashed them. 5 arcs for Frankie Dettori.
This is the last furlong. Enable is in front, chasing her home Capri. Here's Sea of Glass in the yellow down the outside. She's flying at Enable and Frankie Dettori, who have the lead. They come towards the line. Enable, she's done it just.
Frankie Dettori brings Enable to the outside of them, and here she comes up for the lead as they come to the top of the stretch. Magical's moving with her, and she got an inside run, and they're into the stretch, and the 2 fillies are 1-2, Magical and Enable, and they kick on from Saddler's Joy. It's Enable on the outside in the center of the turf course. She has taken the lead, and she's pulling away from Magical, who continues to battle her though. It's these 2, 1-2 down to the finish. Enable and Magical, and they're well clear of the others. Racing Royalty, Enable and Frankie Dettori. The Arc winner is the Breeders' Cup Turf winner too.
Arguably, certainly one of the greatest horses you've had. The greatest mare, you'd say a few years later with Enable. That'd be fair to say again. What a career.
Oh, yeah.
It started off, my memory of the 3-year-old career, she was beaten by a stable companion at Newbury. Did you, at that stage, think, was she a late developer? Was she just getting better?
She went to Newcastle as a 2-year-old.
She did,
and
yeah.
Rab Havlin, he's like the ultimate proper jockey, you know. He's a great field, fabulous with the horses. I mean, he was really tuning the cars up for Frankie most of the time. We're talking Formula 1 terms. But Rab rode her there, and he said, I got a great feel for her. It's a lovely filly, but we know she's middle distance. That old mile at Newcastle's very good, climbs, perfect of a horse that wants to step up next year. We had a problem then. They didn't have novices. So if you'd won a maiden, you were forced straight in for a weight for age or a conditions race. The only race we could run in was that conditions race with colts and everything. We couldn't run in any novice with a £7 penalty. Both these fillies needed to run. We went with Shutter Speed, was the sharper, more forward. Frankie rode her, William Buick rode Enable. And William got in a little bit of a pocket, it would have been closer, but we very much had to run them there. I explained to the owner, they're both the same owner, if I don't run them here, I'm not going to go and run against colts. This is a colts conditions race, we get a little bit of weight filly, let's run here. Both wanting 1.25 miles. And so from there, the other filly, Shutter Speed, went on to York, which she won and wasn't seeing it out at the end. And Enable, of course, then went to the Cheshire Oaks. And that's when she showed exactly what she's made of.
Yeah, she really stayed 1.5 miles well, didn't she?
Well, I think she shocked Frankie because he thought he could hear Ryan coming. And then he got in that straight, changed legs and gone. He said Ryan couldn't believe that we got away from him like that. He was sitting on a very smart filly from Ballydor. And that's when we were pretty confident we were in the right zone.
For the next 2 seasons, it was
phenomenal.
quite incredible following her, because obviously she, like similar to Gruder, she stepped into open company against colts and older horses.
It was always, look, she won the Oaks in that clap of thunderstorm and everything else, and Olivier Pellier got taken up with and bolted down the start, bailed out before, and it was all very dramatic stuff. But, I mean, ever since I saw Dahlia do it, I'd always have this dream of, you know, of the top 3-year-old filly taking them on at the weights. They always talk about them in the arc, but sometimes the filly might be gone by then. And so I've always had that dream, and of course, Takruda did it, and funny enough, Sheikh Hamdan always wanted to do it as well, so it was fulfilled there. In the case of Enable, it just seemed the right and logical thing at that stage. And, you know, you got owner breeders like Prince Khalid, he wanted to do it, so game on, and she made it she won how she pleased, didn't she?
And to be an ARC winner, I mean, it was just the most fabulous start to her career. And it was just the start to her career, because obviously she lasted so long. That first ARC, were you ever in any doubt about her ability to win it?
No, look, we were confident she had the ability, but again, we've switched tracks now, we're at Shantou. And again, our little walk of the track, I go and stand in her stall, it's stall 2, I think. And you're looking down the straight, okay, where they're going to come at you. So this gate is angled, if you ever see the gate at Shantou for the 1.5 miles. And you have to then run out onto this elbow, kink elbow, downhill by the big stables, like the Shantou building. And it's very tricky from the inside draw, because you can get boxed in at Shantou, and you can never get out. I remember Andre Fabre once saying, one day we were talking to some owners in the box, and he just got boxed in one of the arcs there. And someone said, well, at least it's a beautiful racecourse. If I had my way, I would blow it up. As far as he's concerned, he hated getting boxed in. So Frankie said to me, I got to get out of here. I've got 3 Ballydoyle horses on my left. They're all coming for me. They're all going to come and hold me down. That's legitimate. And then I'll get squeezed down in there. I'll never get out. I've got to get out of there, break well, which she did, thank God, get a position. And when they come for me, I've got to take the choice of getting behind them so I can get out. And I realised then that the winning and losing of that race was in the first 400 metres. From that position, from that draw, to get there, to be able to get out. If she broke slow, toast. If she got where she quite couldn't get far enough forward, then they could dominate, one in front, one beside, in those games, you know. And he managed to sneak out. And of course, going round the bend, they all go down the hill, and then they do very French thing, pull it all up. And she is wanting to go, and he's saying, no, no, no. He always said the rule, you come round the bend, and you look at the orange bobbles. You go 3, 2, 1, go. Never straighten up, because you climb and then it levels. Anyhow, she absolutely flew. Wow. But it was tactics yet again. Yeah, she was the best in the race, it could easily have gone wrong.
Funny how things are different. You had your previous owner, which you touched on earlier, to Gruder, end of his career, retired at 3, and you said Hamdan was maybe slightly regretful later on without that decision. Did Khaled Abdullah take much persuasion to keep her Enable in training as long as she was? She was still running as a 5-year-old, wasn't she?
I think he really enjoyed her racing.
Right.
And he wasn't particularly well at the time.
Right.
And I think he just wanted to see a race. And when she, I think when she won that first arc, I think it was for him very, very special, the one at Longchamp, when she won that one. And I remember him standing on the balcony waving his walking stick, and Frankie's waving up to him. And we'd been to see him before the race, and he wasn't very well. And I think that meant everything to him, to keeping her in training.
The second, or the run to the second arc, was a very different build-up. And obviously I think she started her season in the September Stakes on the all-weather at Kempton, where she bumped into Crystal Ocean, who wasn't a bad horse to kick things off. What had happened? What was the reason for...
She came in one day from exercise and she suddenly shortened up late. We went, and a bursa on her knee, a little bursa that we all have in our knees, had burst. And so she had the pain of the pressure. And it turned out a little piece of bone, a little bit of bone that she'd grown, that shouldn't really have grown there, had rubbed the bursa and just like with us, like a little rubber, just split it. And so she had to undergo an operation literally to sew the bursa up and shave that piece of bone so it wasn't there to rub it again. It was just a little rubbing thing. So it wasn't structural. That was the good point.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if it was structural, you'd have retired it straight away. But it wasn't, and to that extent, we were able to bring her back. And I was a bit disappointed when Crystal Ocean turned up, I must say. What a horse to bump into on the all-weather, yeah. But it served its purpose.
Yeah. But she went to the Arc again and won again, but it wasn't quite in the circumstances of the
No,
Prince.
we'd had trouble in the preparation, and she wasn't at her very best. Having said that, the draw went against a certain filly, Sea of Class, who you would have to announce was a very unlucky loser. If she'd had a good draw, we're back to what happened with Takruda. It can be cruel, that draw.
Yeah.
And what do? Do you sit and he came flying at the finish, he just ran out of racetrack.
And a Breeders' Cup win for her as well, Enable. That was,
she was just coming right then.
yeah.
That was an extraordinary race, and I have to be very careful how I say this. I'm not worried about being sued there. It was an interesting race because there was a certain horse called Hunting Horn, beautifully named. He used to go hunting with us quite a lot. And it did, in that race, obviously, Magical was running. Brilliant filly. It rained. We came out of the gate, and I noticed, and I'm standing with Jay Hovday, and I said, watch this horse. And we watched Hunting Horn. He came up on Frankie's outside, and he's got him. He's going to hold him where he wants him. And that's tactics, and that's racing. All right, it's not quite, and it's not the same ownership, but hold it. So I can see going down the back what's going to happen. So you ever watch that race, Frankie then takes back and goes outside. He can't stay in that pocket, he gets round. Then we come into the straight, the inside opens up for Magical, because Hunting Horn, meanwhile, is continuing. And his name suggests, out we go. And it pushes us out wide to right on the top of the track. Well, actually, apart from losing a lot of ground, which we did initially, it's much better ground there because they haven't raced on it. And where they chewed up the inside, and then you got in this amazing battle between her and Magical down the straight, and what was the commentator? And it's racing royalty and all of that stuff. But it was a phenomenal race. She deserved to win it. She did have to go further than the other one. But I always thought the remark of Teddy Grimthorpe afterwards, if we wanted a pony, we'd bring our own. The American concept of a pony, but that's racing tactics. But it was a phenomenal performance to finally get the Arc Breeders' Cup done.
I think being at a racecourse when she was going for her third Arc and her not being able to do it, probably one of the most deflating experiences I've ever had on a racecourse.
Yeah.
We all kind of expected it to happen.
I think so, and I think the race got turned upside down because we would have liked some pace, but you remember all of Aidan's horses came out morning of race, and suddenly we're in the situation of where's the pace. I actually thought Frankie was going to go to the front, the owner of Stradivarius did not want him to go to the front. And Frankie didn't go to the front, I never quite know why, and it turned into a silly Mickey Mouse race, and they all sort of dashed up the straight in very deep ground. And it wasn't, but it was won by Success, wasn't it? So I was very happy for Jean-Claude, who was a friend of mine, hasn't been well recently. I was very happy for him, but I just thought it was, to us, it was a bit of a non-race. I preferred to have gone to the front and gone down with all guns firing, you know. But it was a little bit disappointing that way. But she'd won the King George earlier in the year.
Yeah.
And you can't do better than that. How many, she was 6 years old winning a King George.
Yeah.
And she went straight to stud and got in foal like that. Yeah. And produced a rather cheeky Kingman who's living here at the moment.
Oh, exciting.
And now I think she's a Dubawi filly, I believe. So it's amazing, went straight there, straight in foal, and a fabulous mother. Because so often you find with those great brood mares, I can't how I put this, but it's as though they're too hard, tight, twisted, too masculine, too aggressive. And then it's hard for them then to be the great nurturing mother. You know, that they literally spit their foals out. And it's often, you know, you look at Petit de Toile, took about 3 generations before you found Sarkava.
Yeah.
And it's often been the case, those great race mares, and yet she was a big girl, always a big, imposing girl. And I suppose as a brood mare, she wasn't what I call the light-framed, wiry type, quite the opposite. And I think, to go and get in foal, nurse a foal, care for a foal straight up, it's quite extraordinary when you've raced as hard as that.
I'd like to ask what it was like training her in comparison to all the other great horses, because I think at that point, Stradivarius was still to come, or still to establish himself to the level that he did. But that was the first horse, I think, that felt like it was a public horse that you trained. You know, people had more than it was just more than racing.
No, I think that's true, and the fan mail and people wanting to come and see it, which you can't have everyone walking in every 5 minutes seeing it. Yes, it was. We had a very enjoyable one here when the Queen came to see her horses, and she was in here and went out to the yard, and Frankie says, I'm going to surprise the Queen. She thinks she's going to see her horses. I know what you're going to do. So we go out there, and we're all saying, I know this is going to happen. So I said, we'll let Frankie do it. He got Nable's brought out and said, no, Nable, this is the real Queen. So it was very funny, and she enjoyed seeing it. She was a magnificent filly to look at. And if you look at her, you think, phew. You could see her in the fillies and mares at Aintree. I mean, powerful filly. But she was a pleasure, and yeah, it's iconic is the right word for her. It gets bandied around too much, but I think it was, and she was very much that. And she had such an endearing nature, and she always wanted to do her best every day. But don't ever mess with her routine. If you mess with her routine, she'd be done with you. She was that dominant, the dominant female. I don't know when you watch the Wales in the Pods, there's a dominant female. She was that. And she had to do things the way she wanted it done, or it was not going to be done. I like that strength of mind. I'm quite happy to guide it.
Now, we touched earlier, I mentioned when we talked about one of your earlier, Nathaniel, was saying how maybe Frankel was a bit of a nemesis. Well, he paid you back for the next horse we could talk about. I believe he was the sire of Cracksman, another horse who've, again, what a wonderful CV he ended up in. In terms of ratings, interestingly, he was rated the equal, officially, of Golden Horn. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but tell us something about him, because on his day he was terrific, wasn't he?
He was a lot of fun. There's why key people here would say, look, he's a rib long, he looks a little weak at the moment, but again, you could just see somebody coming. One run, rolling mile, end of the year. He was never going to be a 2-year-old. But he probably, I made a mistake when I ran him at Epsom twice. He was third in the Derby and he just won the Coronation. He had a big, bold action. He didn't like the downhill tracks. He was very unlucky in the Irish Derby. Got carried rather wide there. The less we say about that, the better. And I think obviously he showed great dominance in the Prix d'Ispahan. When they opened actually opened up the new Longchamp that day. Yeah. That was the opening day. He didn't love it down the hill, but did well. And look, you wouldn't beat him in any champion stakes. He was a very, very good horse, bred by Mr. Oppenheimer, owner, breeder, Huscombe Valiant stud. I mean, people like him have been the backbone of our industry for years. And he's done pretty well at stud. He's produced a hell of a good arc winner already, and I noticed a few of them are creeping into Cheltenham as well.
As he was a spectacular winner of both his champion stakes, really wide margin. It didn't go smoothly for the second one. I'm not sort of rushing over the first because he was brilliant, but the following, he came on the back of that. You mentioned about the race at Epsom where he sort of scrambled home, wasn't at his best, and there was a gap, wasn't there, before he turned up in the champion stakes and he was wearing blinkers. But
well, I'd also had the problem. It was interesting. We ran him and he was second in the
Prince of Wales.
In the Prince of Wales at Ascot, and it was one of those days of, I don't know, in Fahrenheit. It would have been in the 80s. He didn't like it at all. And that knocked the living daylights out of him. Right. And Frankie said this horse not handling the heat. And it took us a long time to get him back from that. So hence the long gap. And when he came back, I think I think that day at Ascot had soured him. The ground was quick and it was very hot and he wasn't in love with it. And I think then, look, I'm a great user of blinkers. As I mentioned earlier, Northern Dancer raced in blinkers. Secretariat raced in blinkers. I'm a user of blinkers. I don't regard as I think sometimes they just need focusing. They just need sharpening up. Now, you might want to put them on because they don't try. And the horse on blinkers from the beginning, you pretty know what you're dealing with. Yeah. But when you want to sharpen the horse, there's nothing wrong with it.
And he was good again. I mean, just really good.
Yeah.
I mean, almost the performance of the season.
Yeah, he did.
That day, it was softest ground, I think it was.
It was.
Which he probably liked, but that's almost a career best effort on the day.
I think it probably was. Hence the rating. I think.
Yeah. Would you say he was on a par with Gold? They're different careers, I know, but would you have
well, I think if you put it,
race.
you run one on good to firm, Golden Horn wins every day.
Right.
If you go and put him on very soft ground, Cracksman would overcome because Cracksman's mother could go in the soft.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Fair enough.
Heading down towards the last furlong, and it's the younger horse Stradivarius who's joined the old warrior Big Orange. And as they head towards the last furlong, Stradivarius now in receipt of all the weight has taken it up. What a great day for Andrea and Senni. This is going to be a hat trick. Does Stradivarius strides to the line with Big Orange in second place.
Inside the final furlong they go, and it's Stradivarius who leads by a couple of lengths. Call to Mind and Desert Skyline are giving chase, but this is a very fluent performance. Stradivarius has glided up the Knavesmire to win the Yorkshire Cup. Stradivarius away to the left is now beginning to hit top stride, bridging the gap, but Count Octave has got first run. They've still got over a furlong and a half to go. Stradivarius is now bearing down on him. He comes within a half length. Stradivarius now moving to Count Octave. These two dominate the finish inside the last furlong. Stradivarius, his date with destiny. Count Octave is sticking to the task. He's a half length down. Stradivarius punched out by Dettori to make sure. As Stradivarius, a horse in a million, wins the Lonsdale Cup. Stradivarius coming up between them, second from the left, Search for a Song, and further left, Tashcan, and now Stradivarius moves through menacingly, comes to challenge Thunderous. Search for a Song trying hard to get on terms with Max Vega and Tashcan. On down towards the last furlong, Stradivarius in front, Thunderous wandering off a true line. The rest playing places only now, surely. Stradivarius with a half furlong to cover. Thunderous sticking gamely to the task. Frankie nudging away on Stradivarius. Strad the Impaler, it's 3 Yorkshire Cups for Stradivarius.
The next horse we talk about, John, is another that transcended the general racing public. He became a horse that became a news horse, a public figure. That's Stradivarius, who ended up, I think, running at Royal Ascot 6 consecutive years, winning the majority of the times. Again, another horse who came through the ranks. He won a handicap at Chester.
Yeah, he went to the sales and he's marked just like the Minstrel, who's that one over there with Leicester cantering down to start for the Derby, and that bronze there. And he was like him, 4 white socks, white face, and he didn't sell. And he comes to us, and the one thing you noticed about him, he's the busiest, nosiest horse you could ever come across. He was always in this end of the main yard. In the end, he wound up in box number 2, and he would, if you would have him at a factory, he'd clock everyone in and clock everyone out. He had a window at the front and a window at the back. And he used to check everything, shout at everyone. Quite, as he got older, the most boisterous character. Initially, he was a little bit the timid kid, you know. And then he got a bit fresh and full of himself. And he, again, he broke his maiden at Newcastle over a mile. He had to stick his neck out. And the next year, I remember we stupidly took him to Chester or something, and he got on the wrong leg round there. And then Robert Tart, if only he had a mind, was a good jockey, went to Beverley, and the horse went and won by 5-6 lengths. And we thought, we got this horse is beginning to show, and he might well stay. He's bred on very old-fashioned Wildenstein. You know, Bjorn Nielsen is passionate on his breeding, knows it backwards. You buy an amazing stallion out of a great Pawnese. You're talking about fillies of that whole era, Wildenstein with Angel Penner, who's an old friend of mine. You know, fillies that ran in Arcs and ran in King George's. All of that are in that pedigree. And I thought this could be a proper mile called mile and a half horse. But we didn't really believe it. And then, of course, you're talking about the Royal Ascots. He goes there, and there's the Queen's Vase. Perfect race, beautifully ridden by the other great Sardinian.
And Andrea
Azzini. And of course, from then on, that was just a thrill and a great ride, and he did it right. But the horse got great determination. For a horse of his stature, the huge stride, beautiful walk, like a leopard. And we were sitting in the office, and Peter, who's been with us for a long-suffering 18 years, and he's the racing officer's manager and everything. We're looking, where are we going to run this horse next? And he said, well, he's allowed to run in a Goodwood Cup, you know. 3-year-olds, guess all the weight. I said, Peter, brilliant, thank you. And that's what he was put in there. And you could really say rather the rest is history, because he won 4 of those Goodwood Cups. Yeah. Why was he such a pleasure to train? He would have been the most pleasurable horse you could ever train. He was, every morning, he'd come out in that yard, shout, scream, dance. Everyone could be feeling, got the blues, he'd lift you out of it. I've never known such a character. And out on the heath, he would roar. And for some reason, he got attracted to the colour blue. So whenever the Godolphin string came, at the top of his voice, like he's going to jump on the lot of them. But yet he raced right up until, he was virtually 8 years old. And showed incredible tenacity and courage all the way through. Behaved like a hooligan to saddle him. Yeah. Absolute hooligan. But I suppose a day like that, you didn't. That was his way, the most expressive of horses. And when I say fun to train in every way, because, yeah, it's pressure, but staying horses aren't the pressure. You're not worried about, it's a stallion, the pedigree. If I get beaten in this race, I've gone from being a €75,000 horse, I'm down to 25. If I get it right, I go to 125. You've not got that problem. You know, so, and he and Frankie, I mean, they got on very well, as did the other. I mean, a pleasure to train every day. And of course, the thing I like about the distance races is people enjoy them. Sprints are great, but they are over quickly. Yeah. But everyone can have a bit of a debate as the race is going.
I remember an interview on our channel that the owner gave, Bjorn Nielsen. I think it was with Lydia, But it was a really, really good interview. I was really struck by it. He had passed away, great respect for staying races and the history of staying races. I remember that day he sort of name-checked Ardros, Lemos, Cigaro, either all 3 or 2 of those, and how much sort of time and respect he had for them, and how much he was enjoying having a horse who was trying to follow in their footsteps. I thought it was wonderful, because racing is nothing if it doesn't hang on to its history, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. He's always followed that from when he was a boy. He was obviously, one side afterwards, brought up at Epsom. And so he's always studied all of the pedigrees. He knows them going back to the 1840s. And to have a horse like this to run in those staying races was everything to him. And he, the Doncaster Cup, he was always furious at the prize money, but there wasn't a cup race he didn't win, Yorkshire Cup. And what's he winning a Yorkshire Cup as an 8-year-old, full horse, goes off to stud and covers 100 mares. No, he's been a joy for him to own, to have bred, and he has loved every moment of it. There's a nice bronze of the horse outside, actually. He gave us all, and I think from that point of view, he's been the horse of his lifetime, and for me, in the whole of my time training, without doubt, the most fun. Never had a issue with any legs, nothing. I mean, you would check him, you didn't need to check him. And when you get a horse that's nothing but positive, winning races, and it doesn't wake you up at 2 a.m. worrying, what the hell am I going to do now? It's great to have a horse like that, and that was Stradivarius all the way through. And I think he's being a very good boy down the stud too.
Would there be any particular occasion during his career that sort of stood out more than...
I think his first Gold Cup got a gorgeous ride from Frankie. I think that was a hell of a Gold Cup with those horses, and I think to do that as a 4-year-old. And I think he lifted our spirits when we came out of lockdown, and we were there at Ascot, and even HM the Queen, he was watching it at home, and he skipped 10 clear in softest ground, she said, and a little tear came. You know, the country had a tough time, and we've still not got over it. And, you know, everyone locked in, and suddenly having a horse like that turn up 12 days after we started racing, or whatever it was, 14 days after we started racing, at Ascot and do that. And he was that kind of horse. He would uplift spirits, and there are very few that could do that. But noisy? Oh boy.
Wide across the course in the Dante, Roaring Lion moving up to take the lead with a furlong to go, and it's Roaring Lion who's moved to the front from a wave right across the course of 8, but they're all chasing Roaring Lion Shadow as he storms away in the Dante, putting daylight between himself and his rivals. Roaring Lion out clear.
Here's Roaring Lion being driven hard as they race on to the final furlong up the hill. Saxon Warrior leads. Roaring Lion on the near side. Far side Hawk Bill. Roaring Lion getting his head down. Joining Saxon Warrior. Racing up the hill towards the line. Roaring Lion near side. The Lion roars at Sandown and he wins the Eclipse.
It's Roaring Lion, those quickened up best, entering the final furlong and leads the jump on international field. Roaring Lion is drawing clear by about 3 lengths. Poet's Word in the clear, but he's not going to get to Roaring Lion, and the Lion really roars today and wins the jump on international for Qatar Racing.
Saxon Warrior's gone for home, racing towards the final furlong and has stretched on a couple of lengths in front. Roaring Lion's gone after him on the outside. They're racing now towards the finish, and it's Saxon Warrior, Roaring Lion, the arch rivals. Roaring Lion gets up to win it!
Roaring Lion with the big challenge, Recolitos, and I Can't Fly on the far side. Roaring Lion is beginning to get up from Century Dream, well inside the final furlong. I Can't Fly fast time is getting really tight, but Roaring Lion, the star of the season.
One more horse we're going to talk about from the Clarehaven period, and that's Roaring Lion. Now, going back over his career again, I was struck just by his record post the Derby. I mean, obviously he ran pretty well in the Guineas and the Derby, having run in the Craven at the beginning of the season and was a pretty good 2-year-old. But what he did in winning the Eclipse, the Juddmonte, the Irish Champion and the QE2, I had forgotten just what a remarkable CV he put together in such a short space of time.
Yeah, I mean, he was a phenomenally talented horse. He probably threw away what was the Racing Post trophy by just larking about. He was quite a playboy. And he won the unraced 2-year-olds maiden, and he won a Royal Lodge and all of that. But he played about in that race. In the spring, he was going to go one way or the other with me. He was either going to tell me what to do with the game, or I was going to half play ball with him. And the Sadie there, and Barry and Gary and all of us every morning working out how we're going to play this horse. And I thought, we all decided, if you really go for him and get after him, he might just tell us what to do. So we ran him in, I think it was the Craven, wasn't it? And Ryan Moore was in the race, and I looked across at your horse's eye. He wasn't wanting to do it. Right. Thought, well, that's confirmed what we feared. When you hear other jockeys tell you things, and Ryan's great like that. Normally when it's bad news, because it gives him great pleasure to tell you. But then we ran him in the Guineas, and do you remember they had the cutaway?
Yes.
Well, that was great. He was coming with a nice run. He saw the cutaway. Whoop, I'll get out of here, boys. And, right, we thought, he had a good blow after, and he's messed about again. And we all said, talking to Oisin, it said, right, we've got to step up and trip. You know, the sire did. So let's do it. And that was the beginning of that. He got there. He'd suddenly decided he was enjoying the game. We hadn't got stuck into him. We hadn't forced him for a Guineas. And he then literally turned it on. And quite phenomenal performance there. And obviously when he came back for the Juddmonte, what he did. We made one error. I'll admit, we went to Epsom. We ummed and ahed. No, look, he hit the line strong in the Dante and all of this. You know, that was great. And of course, he was the last horse off the bridle. He didn't stay. Massol wins it. We should have run him the next day in the Prix du Jockey Club. They wouldn't have got near him. But we kicked ourselves. You know, you can get Ascot fever and you can Epsom fever wanting to run. And then, of course, we come back, and what he does in the Juddmonde, it's absolutely brilliant there. Then we go to the Irish Champion. I did warn, I said to Oisin, who's a superb jockey, top class. And I said, be careful there, don't go anywhere near the rail. I said, on my weir drawn, don't go anywhere near the rail, you'll never get out. And he swept very wide and gets up and wins, having had to take a large circumference. But there's no point at left side, I think he could be clever and wriggle through. They're not going to let you. And you've got a short enough straight there. And he gets up and wins that. I suppose in a way his greatest win was in front of the whole of the family on Kipcote Day, because he loathed every moment of that race in the ground. And that's a grey bronze of him behind you there. And he got out, stuck his neck out, showed enormous determination. We then went mad again and ran him in the slop in the Breeders' Cup the day at Churchill when Enable won. We had to run him in that. And that was not clever of us, not nice of us, and didn't show much gratitude for what he's done. But you know what it's like. It rained and he didn't like the slop. The main thing is, Oisin was clear. The moment the horse didn't like it, he was wrapped out on and let him lob round. Covered a book of mares here and then sadly died of colic in New Zealand. And I much missed. I mean, I've had 2 or 3 group class out of his first crop straight away. He would have been a good stallion. And that old stallion, his stock have gone now, you know, kitten's joy. Yeah. But there we go. He was a tough kid, though, to deal with.
Those were the horses that raced under just the name of John Gosden. There are 3 others that sort of bridged the gap between John and Thady Gosden. Lord North, Mishriff and Palace Pier. 3 outstanding horses for various reasons. Lord North was an incredible record at the World Cup, Dubai World Cup night. Mishriff, for what he did in that short period of time, in winning in Saudi and then the Shima Classic on 2 different surfaces. And Palace Pier, who for a spell was another outstanding miler. What are your recollections about those?
Well, obviously Thady's been here for 6 years. He was in Australia, he was in America, and he was with Bob Baffert, and then he was in Japan a bit, and Ireland and everywhere. So he's been with us all along. So he would have been with, Kingman, he came to, drove down, helped me saddle Kingman in the Sussex Stakes. So that's 2014. So he's not just slightly come into it, but he's been with us all the way through. In the case of Mishriff, he remains a remarkable horse because the owner was keen. I mean, he had decent form. He was keen that he ran as a 3-year-old in the Saudi Derby. And he handled the track well. He handled the trip well. He was 3rd, staying on well. So the plan was next year. Of course, we all walked into lockdown and everything. But Thady sort of set off with him a little bit off we go and see how we get on. And went down there. And they were training him there, and he really liked that track. And obviously, he ran a superb race to go and win the Saudi Cup, well ridden, all of that. And the point was, he then flew back home, and he'd taken the race so well. Come on. So we didn't stay down. We came back and then flew back in again. And then he managed to go 1.5 miles on the turf and beat those good Japanese fillies. He was the most versatile, the most extraordinary horse. He could go on most ground, interestingly enough. And there's no doubt he was unlucky. He should have won an Eclipse, but he won a Juddmonde International in a great style. He's wound up to me the most underrated of the good horses we've had here when he left us. I mean, he's gone to start in France. Unfortunately, he's sustained an injury to Copbone, couldn't cover the first season. So I don't know if he'll get his chance. We've got a full brother here, but he's not quite the same shape and form. But Prince Abdulrahman A.A. Faisal, he's bred horses here for years. He used to have plenty with Henry in the old days, and then Henry, Julie, and he would be in the kitchen smoking away, and he loves his cigarettes. But he's brilliant to a bred horse, a horse like him, and he was a tough dude to deal with. And his wins in France in the Prix de Jockey Club, flying at the last finish, as well as the Guillaume de Narno, which is always the way they like to do it, win the Jockey Club, Guillaume de Narno. I remember Frankie getting on the ferry. Now I made it. I got over lockdown year. Just got there in time to go to ride him in Deauville. It was a funny old time. He was our sort of lockdown king, if you like, that horse, and broke us out of it. But I think to have done what he did, I think you're right to zero in on him. I think he was, to that extent, he was able to be able to do what he did on different ground, different distances, mile, quarter mile, at top Group 1 level. Not many do that. They get a bit specialist, you know.
Palace Pier, when he won at Sandown, his first win at Sandown, because he followed up in his second start, we both decided we were going to back him for the Guineas. Yeah. So we were slightly disappointed when he turned up in a handicap, I think, at Newcastle on his return. But he did prove to be an outstanding miler.
Yeah, we had to make use of that. Remember, there's no racing until June the 1st. So we saw this handicap, and this horse badly needed a run before Royal Ascot, which was coming up on its dates on June the 20th.
That's right, yeah.
So we saw it as a perfect place to go and get a run into him. And because he's a big, powerful, burly horse, and he needed it. And so, you know, sitting in the office, assistant, stadium, and I thought this is the way we plotted that whole period from June the 1st. We managed to have 28 winners in that first month of June. So we did a lot of scheming and plotting, a lot of baldric plans. And that was the plan, to go there and then go to St James Palace, which he duly won, beating good horses like Pinatubo. And it was there was a small field, and Frankie said they all started fighting with each other. And I just said, I'd come round them. I said, you took the clever old man route. But no, very, very, very smart horse. And strong, powerful, probably would have gone a mile and a quarter if we'd wanted him to.
And speaking of cunning plans, Lord North, and I think I've heard you talking in the past about campaigning horse. In fact, you've mentioned it today. You protect the horses in scenarios or situations where they're not going to excel, but when you do find a scenario that they do excel in, you exploit those. Lord North in Dubai, when it comes to that 9-furlong race on the turf, outstanding.
Yeah. Look, he was a hooligan and a bit of a panicker in the starting gate. He broke the gate in a couple of places. And so, you know, there was no way we were going to get him on a racetrack, and so we gelded him, which is great. Trainers love that because they can race them for much longer. So you beware when the trainer wants to geld. But there's no doubt that the ability was always there, but was finding the right spot. And then he wasn't an easy horse to keep sound. He's now retired happily at Wood Ditton Stud, and I think he's making a right nuisance of him, saying they're chewing up all the railings. But he was a horse that, if you could get him right, I mean, he won a Prince of Wales, and he won the Group was at Haydock. But if you could peak him once a year on those kind of races, it was perfect. You might need a lot of time off afterwards, but he was not a horse who could take a massive racing. So spacing them out, $5-6 million races, and he managed to do 3 in a row. I mean, probably the best one was when he's in the Japanese Sandwich. 3 of them in a line, he squeezed, and he dead heats. There's an amazing picture. He won one very comfortably, his first one, then he won one. But Thady was travelling with him half the time. And I said, to keep staying down there, winning races, don't come back. Yeah. But, you know, we've been lucky from that point of view, because I knew the family, and he wasn't necessarily picked, but he came to us as a Godolphin horse. And it's the same thing when you look at fillies like the Fugue that we had here, and then you look at Dare Mi and what she achieved, winning the inaugural Shima Classic at the new Maidan. And then she produces Too Darn Hot, who comes here for the Lloyd Webbers and is a champion 2-year-old. Then we muddled him we muddled the horse up at the beginning of his 3-year-old here, and then he overcame both the trainer and the manager to go and, you know, win Group 1 and then go and win a Sussex Stakes. And he was a very fast horse. And yet his stock's doing very well. So you look at Too Darn Hot and think it's great to see stock, and then you think of a poor old Roaring Lion. Yeah. It never happened. Then a horse like Mischief, who might have missed the boat a bit, but hopefully he can produce something decent in France. Yeah.
Just sort of wrapping things up around the horses, and you've mentioned a few others that didn't get a mention with any great detail, but you touched on a few like Keen Hunter, Wolfhound, Cat Rail, Mutaram, who won the Prince of Wales Stakes a couple of times, presenting, and Flemensforth, two terrific National Hunt stallions. Tamure, I think he finished second in the Derby to Lamtara. There's Malhub, who won the Golden Jubilee.
The inaugural Jubilee.
That's right.
Yeah.
Ledger winners in Lucano, Arctic Cosmos, Mars Marvel. You mentioned Dare Mi.
Logician,
Rainbow View, The Fugue, Great Heavens. fast 2-year-old called Shalaa, Calix, who was brilliant when he won the Coventry, Too Darn Hot. I mean, there are so many others.
One Oaks.
I haven't even mentioned Persuasive, Starcatcher, I mean, loads of others that we could carry on talking about. But
that's why I've been lucky. A lot of those are owner breeders. And I've been very, very lucky to train for owner breeders. And that's something that is going to slightly disappear. But, you know, you look at the money they make up the sales. And I always say when they just say, I paid that for that, that'll do that. And I said, you don't know what the big owner breeders have got on their farms right now. And if you led some of them through that ring, quite what they'd make. So, you know, the owner breeders have been the backbone of certainly of this stable for the last 20 years. And we've been incredibly lucky to have them.
I wanted to ask you about a couple of other horses, just because of history and how important folklore is in the sport of racing. One horse in 1994, Halling, won the Cambridgeshire, might have been one of the easiest winners of a heritage handicap that we've ever seen. And everyone always points back to the Windsor run, how he got beaten off a market was in the 70s. But that was, I mean, he turned out to be one of the most outstanding quarter horses.
Steve Caulden rode him as a 2-year-old. Thought he could be very good. And he fractured a hop. Diasis, sickle hop. So we thought, right, we're not going to make anything smart. We'll have a right baldric plan here. And he came right in the spring, into the summer. I said, let's just charge off. Let's just go and win a Cambridgeshire. Do it well. We weren't exactly hiding anything much. We just didn't get involved early on. So we're coming through to the race, and I'd taken the winners, and I made a mistake. I put Brent Thompson on. And I said, Brent, you know, this is a perfect place, because they didn't have the cameras then, and the sun is setting in the late race, and the stewards see the sun setting. They can't see a thing. Look, I just like this horse. He hasn't run for a bit just to enjoy himself, okay? Well, I think Brent stopped at every boat on the way round for a cup of coffee. But whatever happened, I mean, it was just abysmal. But luckily, I thought, this is my one big attempt at getting one handicap. I'm about to get arrested here, and quite correctly. I've never tried this since, by the way. And so I then look at it, and he's not going to get in the weight. And I'm over in Deauville, and I said, Frankie went to ride him at Ripon. And I said, Frankie, the weights close at midnight, tonight, Saturday. You've got to win nicely on this horse, because he's a 3-year-old. He's not going to get into the handicap. He wins by 6. So, unfortunately, Brent Thompson has told most of New Zealand and Australia. So, we laugh at this stage, and then the whole bloody thing turns tragic, because I don't bet, really, but Alex Scott I'd like to have a bet. And he'd been watching this, so I said, okay, I'll have half of what you have. Come to the race. It's the Friday night before, and Alex was murdered. You remember? Mm. And Jesus, I sat in those stands, and that horse won doing handstands. And I couldn't have. It was the most tragic, appalling thing. You're having all the fun and everything. And he was a very good horse. And I did inform Sheikh Mohammed. I said, this is a very good horse. It's going to be a group. He said, thank you very much, John. We'll take him to Godolphin now. And that's possibly why I probably took my time bringing him to the 4, because I knew Godolphin would be after him. And I think a few of us trainers at that stage were frightened of exposing a nice 2-year-old for fear it would be gone. And that's human nature.
One other horse, I'll indulge myself if you don't mind, because I just thought he was just the most tough, wonderful, durable racehorse who just could handle almost any scenario. Was Decorated Hero. He started off life as a little handicap. I think he ended up finishing 3rd in a Breeders' Cup Mile. Yeah. But he was also part of Frankie's Magnificent 7. I absolutely adored that little horse.
He was known as Square Wheels because he couldn't trot. I bought him on spec at Goffs. I just liked the look of the horse, and then I phoned up Herbert Allen. And Herbert Allen of Allen Company, New York, they'd had horses with my father many years ago through the BBA Ireland. And so I asked him to have a horse, and he said, well, the market's up today, I'll take him. I think he was 60,000 Irish punts or something like that, 50, 60. So he took him. We had more fun with that horse. He went everywhere. Won at Longchamp Group 2s, went to Hong Kong. Yeah. He travelled everywhere, and he was just the most lovely horse. And Mrs. Allen would come. She'd turn up anywhere where he was running, and then Mr. Allen was very old and ill and saw him win at Ascot. And he was one of those horses you wish you could find more like it. Yeah, and he wound up 3rd in the Breeders' Cup. And we had a pretty wild night the night before. That was a mistake. Frankie's horse, the good horse, didn't run. Was it Singspiel? Might have been.
Yes.
Anyhow, it didn't run, so he said we could all go and have fun. And we wound up with I'm not names dropping, up at Rod Stewart's house, a whole gang of us. And we were there till 3, 4 in the morning and then headed down to the racetrack. It was disgraceful behaviour, and maybe you better edit that out.
You've also highlighted, John, the people that have been part of the success. We'll pick out jockeys if you don't mind, and you've touched on a few of them, but any that we leave out, feel free to include. But see the likes of Steve Cawthon, Willie Carlson, Pat Edery, Walter Swinburne, Jimmy Fortune, Richard Hughes, William Buick, and two incarnations of a certain Lanfranco de Tory.
Yeah, I think we've been so blessed with great riders in Europe. And I think probably the general public have no understanding how tough it is to be a jockey. I mean, in this country, for instance, the weights, no one's getting smaller. Doing the weights, you're coming in, you're riding work 5:30, 6:30 in the morning, you're then going home, you maybe can have a coffee, maybe a little tiny sun, you get in the car and you've got to drive 100 miles, 150 miles racing, come back evening. You know, and I always, you know, you've got evening meetings under lights in the cold. And then those jocks have got to get back at 9, 10:30 at night. Then they're going to, maybe midnight to drive back. And then they've got to go and ride work in the morning next day. It's very tough in this country. And I suppose in America, I got very close to the jockeys there because in America, you're like a traveling circus. You're all on the, you're all in that group together. You move from track to track, 3, 4 months here, move on. You go out, you eat together, you're just the best of pals. And I realized then that all of the problems that they have to deal with in terms of weight, you're talking about courage, you're talking about skill. And I watched Cheltenham, the skill of those jockeys. Unbelievable, their nerve. I remember when you used to be allowed to stand by a fence, I used to like going to stand by the last open ditch in the Queen Mother Chase. The speed, the noise, it's unbelievable. To watch someone like Rachel Blackmore, she rides so light on a horse. It's an incredible, you know, it's one thing about it, Tory be the same. They can be the same weight as someone else, but it's where they put the weight on the fulcrum, on the wither. It's like you and I giving a piggyback. If you've got a kid with his legs wrapped around your neck tight, you can run. If it's flopping around on your back, you can't. It's very interesting. And I think jockeys know, I have nothing but admiration for them. The demands that are made on them mentally, physically, and this ridiculous program we have of endless racing, wall-to-wall racing. I think it's corrosive and destructive. So in terms of jockeys, you can mention the names. I mean, so many of them are, you know, I remember Yves Saint-Martin, I would go back a bit, most beautiful rider on a horse. Leicester, I loved it when we were at Battle of Doyle and Noel Murless, who's riding for Noel Murless, and we went on to ride at Vincent. He was masterful. His knowledge, his feel from a horse, how accurate he could be. Not that he'd tell you much, of course. And the way that he would always do it his way and not necessarily the way the trade wanted. In fact, the two most upset trainers after a piece of work I've ever seen, one was Vincent O'Brien when he went too hard on the minstrel in the spring, and the other one was Noel Murless on J.O. Tobin one day when Leicester had a right field when he wasn't meant to. And I've never seen them in a tempers like it in their lives, and they were very calm men normally. But no, and then you could mention about Pat Edery, most instinctive rider. Like Lafitte Pincay, similar type, very instinctive. Fallon, so much feel for a horse. And he could never really explain how he come with that long flopping range, squeezing with the legs. Extraordinary rider. And then, you know, you can, de Tory, obviously, pound for pound, the greatest I put on a horse, because like Ryan Moore, they are the top international jockeys at this moment in the world, if you like. They can go anywhere and adapt very quickly. And I think who else we're talking? William Buick, obviously, came to us after his apprenticeship had run out. And it's a tough time for them then. They're not at Lawrence, and he came to us, wonderful jockey. Superb jockey, great judgment, always in the right place, and a really lovely person. I know you can go on, you can go James Doyle, another talent. You can ask me, well, I'll tell you what their attributes are there. But we are so lucky to have so many great jockeys here, we really are.
John, thank you so much for having us here. The whole purpose of the Racing Great series is to capture the thoughts and all the stories that are involved with great racehorses, but the people who helped make those horses great. And from a racing fan's point of view, Steve and I, hopefully echoing the sentiments of racegoers around the world, the way you've handled the horses that have become household names for the likes of us has been wonderful for the last 40 odd years. It's been wonderful watching so many great horses emerge under the name John Gosden. Best of luck to John and Thady Gosden in the future. But on behalf of racing fans all around, thank you for your part in making so many success stories of so many great racehorses. It's been a pleasure and a privilege to sit here with you discussing them today. Thank you.
Thank you. And I've been lucky to train it.